Have security walk her to the lobby and take whatever she left on my desk out with her.
You have a gala tonight, Mr. Kang. Buckwheat in at least 3 of the courses. When it happens, and it will happen, you'll have about 10 minutes and not one doctor in that ballroom who believes it's real.
This is the only thing in this building that buys you those 10 minutes. Keep it on you.
Throw it away. We're finished here.
Why did the quiet nurse smile instead of beg for the job she just lost? Why would a woman humiliated in front of 6 executives leave a gift on the desk of the man who fired her? What did she know about that night that his $10,000 a month physician did not? And why, only hours later, would that same man be flat on his back on a marble floor in a black tuxedo, not breathing, while the one person in Seoul who could save him was the one he had ordered out of the building? Because by midnight, Kang Tae-jun would be dying at his own party, and the last competent hands in that room would belong to the nurse he had fired at noon. This is her story. And it starts 9 years earlier, 7,000 miles away, in a city that taught her how to stay calm while everything around her burned. Imani Reeves grew up on the east side of Detroit, in a brick house that shook a little every time her father's truck pulled out of the station down the block. Marcus Reeves was a firefighter and a paramedic, 26 years on the job, and he had one lesson he repeated so often it became the frame she saw the whole world through. In a fire, he'd tell her, the loudest person in the room is the most scared one. Be the quiet one, baby. The quiet one is still thinking. She was quiet and she was thinking, and she was good. Nursing school on a scholarship. Then, to her mother's terror and her father's fierce pride, the United States Army. They made her a critical care nurse, then a flight nurse, and then they sent her where flight nurses go. A combat support hospital outside Kandahar. 2 deployments. The kind of place where the helicopters came in faster than the paperwork. And a 29-year-old woman from Detroit ran a trauma bay the way a conductor runs an orchestra that is on fire. She earned a reputation there that followed her the rest of her life. Imani Reeves could hear a crisis coming before the machines did. A soldier could be lying there with numbers that looked textbook perfect, and she would stop at the foot of the cot, tilt her head, and say, quietly, "This one's going to crash in 4 minutes." And in 4 minutes he would crash, and she would already have her hands where they needed to be. The doctors called it instinct. It wasn't. It was 10,000 hours of watching bodies tell the truth a beat before the monitors caught up, and the discipline to trust what she saw over what the screen said. She saved people nobody thought could be saved. And she lost some she would carry forever, which is the tax on that kind of work, and she paid it in full. When her service ended, she was stationed for her last year at a United States military hospital an hour south of Seoul. And when the uniform finally came off, everyone assumed she would go home and run a trauma center. She had offers. Instead, she did something that worried the people who loved her. She took the quietest job she could find. Occupational health nurse for the Sunjae Group, one of Korea's great family conglomerates. 40 floors of steel and glass in the heart of Seoul. Flu shots. Ergonomic assessments. Annual executive physicals for men who thought a checkup was a formality between meetings. Grace Okoro, who had shared a trauma tent with her in Kandahar, and now ran an emergency department back in Atlanta, said it plainly on the phone. "You are the best I ever worked with, and you're taking blood pressures in a tower." "Why?" "Because for 1 year," Imani said, "I want to go to work and have nobody die." Is that allowed? She kept one habit from the old life. A small field notebook, always in her coat pocket, in which she wrote down every warning sign she ever saw, dated, timed in her own tight shorthand. Chart it or it didn't happen. It was a discipline. It would become a weapon. She had been in that quiet tower for 8 peaceful months when the elevator opened one Monday morning and quiet walked out of her life for good. What she didn't know yet was that the most dangerous patient she would ever treat had just scheduled his annual physical, and that he would spend the next 3 months doing everything in his considerable power to die. The first sign arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, disguised as an arrogant man in a hurry. Kang Tae-jun, chief executive of the Sunjae Group, arrived for his executive physical 11 minutes late and made it clear the appointment was beneath him. He was 36, tall, impeccable, and he moved through the world like a man who had never once had to wait for anything. Behind him came his personal physician, Dr. Baek Seung-ho. A silver-haired celebrity doctor whose clients were the 20 richest families in the country and whose fee could have funded the clinic for a year. "This is a courtesy," Dr. Beek informed Imani, before she had said a word. "The chairman requires all executives to complete the company physical. I manage Mr. Kang's actual care. You may take his blood pressure so the file has a number in it." Imani took the blood pressure. She also, because she could not help what she was, watched. She watched Tae-jun press 2 fingers to the center of his own chest, to the breastbone, an unconscious little gesture he made when he was tense, as if pressing on something that ached. She watched a faint healing rash on the inside of his forearm, the ghost of hives days old. And when she asked lightly whether he'd been unwell recently, she watched him wave it off. "A bad dinner last month," he said. "My throat felt tight. Beek says reflux. Are we finished?" "Reflux," Dr. Beek agreed smoothly. "And stress. The man runs a 100 billion won company." Imani said nothing for a moment. In her experience, the word reflux was where careless doctors filed things they hadn't looked at. A tight throat after a specific meal was not, to her ear, the same story as heartburn. "May I ask what you ate?" she said. "I don't remember what I eat," Tae-jun said, standing, buttoning his jacket. "That's what people are for." He said it without cruelty, which was somehow worse. He simply did not see her. To him, she was furniture that took a pulse. She let it go. But that night she opened the notebook and wrote the first line, the date, the gesture, the tight throat, the word reflux, and beside it, in her shorthand, a small question mark she did not like. She told herself it was just the old habit. What she didn't know yet was that the question mark would need a whole page of its own, and then a file, and then a fight. If the first sign came to her by accident, the second one she went looking for. It nagged at her for a week, that tight throat, the way a wrong note nags a musician. So she did the thing an occupational health nurse is entirely permitted to do. She opened the executive's own health file, the one the company kept, and she read every page. And there it was, laid out across 14 months like footprints leading toward a cliff. 3 incidents. Not 1. 3. 14 months ago. A business dinner in Bizen. Flushed skin, itching, called an allergic reaction to shellfish. Treated with an antihistamine, forgotten. 6 months ago, a client dinner in Gangnam. Hives, a tight throat, lightheadedness, logged by Dr. Beek as food poisoning. Last month, the one he'd mentioned. Throat tightness, a racing heart, filed as reflux and stress. 3 episodes. Each one worse than the one before it. Each one written off as something small and unrelated. Nobody had drawn the line between the 3 dots, because no single doctor had been looking at all 3 at once. But Imani was. She pulled the restaurants. She pulled where she could. The menus. And a cold certainty settled over her. The same certainty she used to feel at the foot of a cot in Kandahar. Every single one of those dinners had featured buckwheat. Cold buckwheat noodles in Bizen. A buckwheat crepe in Gangnam. A bowl of memulguksu last month. In Korea, buckwheat was everywhere. In the noodles, in the tea, in a dozen beloved dishes. And an adult could develop an allergy to it out of nowhere, in their 30s, having eaten it safely their whole life. She called Grace in Atlanta at 2 in the morning Seoul time and laid it out. Grace was quiet for a moment. "Imani," she said. "That's not 3 unrelated bad nights. That's a staircase. Every reaction bigger than the last. You know what's at the top of a staircase like that? I know exactly what's at the top. The next step could be the one that kills him. Have you told anyone?" "I'm about to make myself very unpopular," Imani said. That was the second piece. And it was no longer a question mark. It was a countdown, and only she could hear it ticking. The third piece arrived a month later, and this time she saw it with her own eyes. The Sunjae Group held a luncheon on the 40th floor to celebrate the opening of merger talks with Daewoo Holdings, the biggest deal in the company's history. Imani was there in her official capacity, standing against the wall in her navy uniform, invisible, which suited her. The caterers served a summer course of naengmyeon, cold buckwheat noodles in an icy broth, elegant in a stone bowl. Tae-jun ate half of it while talking, and Imani watched it happen the way you watch a car drift toward a guardrail. His collar seemed to tighten. He cleared his throat, once, twice. A flush climbed his neck. He pressed 2 fingers to his sternum, and his voice, mid-sentence, went slightly, weightly hoarse. Dr. Beek, seated beside him, leaned over. "The room is warm," he murmured, and poured his patient a glass of water. "Drink." It was not the room. Imani was already moving before she decided to. She crossed the floor, quiet and unhurried, set a hand on the back of Tae-jun's chair, and said, low, only for him, "Mr. Kang, put the noodles down. Look at me. Slow breath in through your nose." He was startled enough to obey. The flush held, then slowly began to fade. She caught it on the low end of the staircase this time. It passed as something small. Dr. Beek was furious. "He is fine," he said, loud enough for the table. "A little warm. Nurse, your enthusiasm is noted. Return to your post." Tae-jun looked at her, and for 1 second something flickered behind the arrogance, something that was almost fear, before he smoothed it over and turned back to his guests. That afternoon Imani did the thing that would later nearly end her, and would also, in the end, save his life. She wrote it all up. A formal occupational health memorandum. The pattern of 3, now 4, escalating reactions. The buckwheat thread running through every one. A clear recommendation in writing, dated and signed, allergy testing. A prescription for epinephrine autoinjectors to be carried at all times. Strict avoidance of buckwheat, above all at catered company events. She filed it with the medical director and copied Dr. Beek because that was protocol. The first sign. The second staircase. The fourth reaction, now on the record in her own hand. 3 times over now, this man's body had told her exactly what it intended to do to him. All she had to do was make the people who outranked her believe it before the top of the stairs. What she didn't know yet was that, in this company, being right was not the same as being heard, and that the distance between the two would be measured in one man's pride. Dr. Beek's reply landed in her inbox the next morning, cold and precise. "Ms. Reeves, you are an occupational nurse. You are not Mr. Kang's physician, and you are not an allergist. Mr. Kang has had a few minor episodes of reflux and stress-related discomfort, which I am managing. Your memorandum is alarmist, outside your scope, and will not be forwarded. Please confine yourself to your duties." She read it twice. Then she sat with a decision she recognized, because she had faced its cousin many times in a war. She could let it go. Keep the quiet job. Keep her invisibility, her one peaceful year, her promise to herself that nobody would die on her watch. All she had to do was agree that a rich man's celebrity doctor knew better than she did, and file the memo away and hope. Or she could fight a chief executive and his $10,000 physician on behalf of a body that had told her the truth 3 times. She thought about the cots in Kandahar. She thought about how many times she had watched something preventable happen because the person in the room with the most authority was not the person in the room with the truth. She had promised herself a year of peace. She had never promised herself a year of silence. She gave herself a deadline instead. The Sunjae Foundation Gala, the crown of the company's year. The night the merger with Daewoo would be toasted before 300 guests and half the business press in Seoul, was 6 weeks away. She knew the tradition. She knew the celebrity chef. She knew, because she had made a quiet phone call, that the signature course was always his famous chilled buckwheat noodle dish. 6 weeks. She would make Kang Tae-jun listen through every proper channel there was. And if she could not make him listen, she would make sure that when the top of the staircase came on that exact night, the one thing that could save him existed and was close enough to reach. She wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. And beneath it, one line. I did not hold men together in a tent in Kandahar to watch one die of pride in a boardroom in Seoul. She had 6 weeks to be right out loud. What none of them knew yet, not Beek, not the chairman's son, not the man himself, was that the nurse they had told to stay in her lane had spent 9 years in the one profession on earth that does not accept "he seemed fine" as a cause of death. 5 weeks out, she went up the chain, and the chain closed ranks. She requested a meeting with the medical director. He was sympathetic, tired, and outranked. "Dr. Beek is Mr. Kang's personal physician," he said. "I can't override a man like that on the word of, forgive me, our staff nurse. Bring me Mr. Kang's signature on an order, and I'll act. Until then my hands are tied." She requested 20 minutes with Tae-jun himself. His assistant, a careful young woman named Han Yuri, booked it, then unbooked it twice, then finally slid Imani into a gap between meetings. He gave her 4 minutes and did not sit down. "Doctor, Beek tells me you've been filing memos about my digestion," he said, checking his watch. "About your immune system," Imani said. "You've had 4 reactions in 14 months, each worse than the last, everyone after eating buckwheat. That's not digestion. That's an allergy that's escalating. And escalating allergies don't plateau. They peak. I have eaten everything on this peninsula my entire life, which is exactly how adult-onset allergy works. The body decides one day that a thing it used to tolerate is a threat, and then it overreacts, harder each time." She kept her voice level, unhurried, the voice she used on frightened patients. "I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to get tested. One afternoon. That's all." For a moment, one moment, she saw him waver. He pressed 2 fingers to his sternum without knowing he did it. Then Director Jang, the chief operating officer, leaned in from the doorway, and the moment died. "Tae-jun," Jang said pleasantly. "We do not have time. 5 weeks from the biggest signing in this company's history. For the American nurse to convince the Daewha people that our chief executive is a sick man. Investors do not marry fragile companies." He smiled at Imani. "No offense. You're very thorough." Tae-chun's jaw set. She watched him choose in real time, the version of himself the room wanted to see, the invincible one. "Thank you, Ms. Reeves," he said. "I'm sure you mean well. That will be all." So she stopped asking permission and started building proof. She had 2 allies, Grace in Atlanta, who pulled every clinical paper on escalating food allergic reactions and coached her over video calls at midnight, and, unexpectedly, Han Yuri, the assistant, who had watched the luncheon, who had seen the flush and the hoarse voice and the fingers on the sternum, and who had started to believe. "He's not a bad man," Yuri told her quietly one evening by the elevators. "He's a proud one. His father ran this company like a fortress. Tae-jun thinks if he ever looks weak, even for a second, the whole thing falls down. Being allergic, needing a nurse, that's weakness to him." She hesitated. "I don't think weakness is what's going to kill him." "No," Imani said. "Pride is." And then, 3 weeks out, she got her miniature proof in front of everyone. An older vice president collapsed in the lobby at the end of the workday. Cardiac. The kind of gray silent going down that empties a room of everyone useful. In the seconds while 300 employees stood frozen with their phones out, one Navy-uniformed nurse crossed the marble at a dead calm, went to her knees, and did what she had done in a war 1,000 times. She ran the code alone until the paramedics arrived, and she handed them a living man. Kang Tae-jun watched the whole thing from the mezzanine. He watched the woman he had dismissed as furniture keep a heart beating with her own 2 hands. Without raising her voice once, and he saw, finally, what he had in his building and had told to stay in her lane, he did not apologize. Men like him rarely knew how. But the next morning a note came down to the clinic, in his own handwriting, 3 words. "Thank you. Sincerely." She kept it. It was the first true thing he had ever said to her. What she didn't know yet was that his pride and his gratitude were now at war inside him, and that she was running out of weeks before something would force him to choose between them for good. 2 weeks out, the staircase took another step, and this time she nearly lost everything catching him on it. There was a private dinner for the Daewha executives, a smaller, intimate affair to seal the goodwill before the gala. Imani was not invited, of course, but Yuri texted her one word from under the table: noodles. Imani was in a taxi within 90 seconds. She reached the restaurant, talked her way into the service corridor, and got eyes on him through the kitchen pass just as it began. The flush. The hand at the sternum. The voice going wet and thin. This one was climbing faster than the luncheon. She did not wait for permission this time. She walked into a private dining room full of the most important men in Korean business, put herself between the chief executive and his plate, and took command of the room in the flat. Certain voice of someone who has done this while being shot at. "Everyone stay seated. Mr. Kang, look at me. You're having an allergic reaction. I need you to trust me for 90 seconds. She got an antihistamine into him from her own bag, got him upright and breathing slow, watched his airway like a hawk, and headed the thing off before it reached the top of the stairs. Caught it, again at the edge. And then Dr. Beek arrived, summoned by a panicked aide, and did what threatened men do. He took the room back. "A little indigestion," he announced, waving Imani aside as though she were a waiter who'd spilled something. "I've treated him. Everyone please, back to your dinner." "My apologies," the nurse gets overexcited. He steered Tae-jun out with a proprietary hand and a soothing murmur, and rewrote the whole scene, in real time, into a story where he was the hero and she was the hysteric. Tae-jun, humiliated to have nearly collapsed in front of the men he most needed to impress, let Beek do it. He did not look at her as he left. It got worse. To justify her intervention in her report, Imani had cited the specifics of his prior treatments, which meant she had read Dr. Beek's private notes appended to the company file. Beek found out, and Beek, who now understood that this woman was the single greatest threat to his reputation, went to the medical director with a weapon. "She accessed my confidential clinical records without authorization," he said. "That is a serious violation. Either she is removed, or I report this company to the licensing board and take Mr. Kang's care, and his family's, and everything that follows with me when I go." For 3 days, Imani did not know if she still had a job. Grace talked her through it at midnight. A labor lawyer told her the records question was genuinely gray and genuinely dangerous. She had saved his life twice now quietly, and it had bought her nothing but a file with her name on it and the word insubordination at the top. "Walk away," the lawyer advised. "Whatever this is, it isn't worth your license." She thought about it. She truly did. Then she looked at the calendar, at the gala 12 days out, and she thought about a stone bowl of cold buckwheat noodles being plated in a hotel kitchen for 300 guests. And she knew she was not going to walk away. What she didn't know yet was which would arrive first, her firing or his last reaction, or that in the end they would arrive on the very same day. She spent that week doing the only thing left to her. She built the failsafe. If she could not make him carry epinephrine, she would carry it to him. She got a prescription in her own name from a physician friend legitimately for herself, and she bought 2 auto-injectors. She studied the gala's published menu until she had it memorized. She learned the floor plan of the ballroom, the location of every exit, the fastest route from the service corridor to the head table, the way she had once memorized landing zones. And on the night before the gala, alone in her small apartment, she wrote the note. She sat for a long time with the pen. This was the hardest thing she had done in the whole affair. Harder than the war, because in the war no one had ever asked her to save a man who did not want to be saved and had made her feel small for trying. She did not write instructions. She was not a manual. She wrote the truth from one human being to another. "Mr. Kang, I could be wrong. I hope more than you know that I am. But if I am right, it will happen fast, and there will be no one in that room who believes it in time except me, and you will not have ordered me to stay. So I am leaving this with you instead. It does not fix anything. It buys you 10 minutes and one more chance to be proven right about how strong you are. Keep it close tonight. Whatever you think of me is fine. Just don't be dead. Imani Reeves, RN." She folded it once, set it with the injector, and put both in her coat pocket for the morning. She had built her whole case, every proof, every warning, every documented step of the staircase, for one purpose. To keep a man alive who had spent 3 months telling her to be quiet. The trophy was ready. All that was left was the war, and it came for her before lunch. The gala was that night. And the reckoning came at 11 that morning in his office, exactly as she'd seen it 100 times in the dark. Beek had forced the issue. It was her or him, and the company could not go into the biggest signing in its history at war with the family's physician. Tae-jun called her up to end it himself because he was, whatever else he was, not a coward who fired people through assistance. She stood in that glass office, and Beek stood at Tae-jun's shoulder, and Director Jang leaned in the doorway, and 2 vice presidents arranged their faces into neutrality, and Kang Tae-jun told her, in a voice with no cruelty and no give, that her services were no longer required. "You accessed confidential records," he said. "You created scenes in front of clients. Dr. Beek has managed my health for 6 years without incident." 4 incidents, Imani said quietly. "In 14 months. I can list the dates." That's enough. He did not raise his voice. That was the thing about him. He never had to. Have security walk her to the lobby. And take whatever she left on my desk out with her. And here is where you came in. Because she did not beg. And she did not shrink. She set the slim auto-injector on the black glass and the folded note beside it, and she told him about the buckwheat and the 10 minutes and the ballroom full of doctors who would not believe it was real. She told him to keep it on him. Throw it away, he told Yuri, and turned the page. We're finished here. Imani Reeves picked up her small box of belongings, walked to the elevator with her back straight, and left the tower quietly, the way her father had taught her to move through a fire. But Han Yuri did not throw the injector away. When the office cleared, she took it out of the wastebasket, and the note with it, and she slipped both into her clutch for the gala. Because she had watched this woman keep a heart beating on a marble floor, and she was not going to bet her boss's life on his pride. What none of them knew yet, as the caterers wheeled the first course toward the ballroom, was that the nurse Kang Tae-jun had fired at noon was sitting in a coffee shop across from the hotel at 9 that night, unable to leave the city, watching the lit windows of the ballroom, with a second injector in her coat pocket and her phone in her hand. The Sunjae Foundation Gala filled the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel with 300 of the most important people in the country and a bank of press along the far wall, chandeliers, a string quartet. The merger with Daewoo to be toasted at the stroke of 10. At 9:40, the celebrated chef sent out his signature course personally to applause. Chilled buckwheat noodles in a clear jade broth, in stone bowls, one set before every guest of honor at the head table. Han Yuri, 3 seats down, went cold. Kang Tae-jun, mid-conversation with the Daewoo chairman, proud, invincible, unwilling to be the man who couldn't eat what the famous chef had made for him in front of 300 people, lifted his chopsticks and ate. Across the street, Imani's phone lit up with one word from Yuri: eating. She was out of the coffee shop and crossing the road against the light before the screen went dark. It hit him during the toast. He was on his feet, glass raised, halfway through a sentence about the future, when his voice changed. The flush climbed his neck above his collar. He cleared his throat and it did not clear. His free hand went to his sternum, 2 fingers pressing. This time the staircase did not stop. His airway was closing. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered, and Kang Tae-jun, chief executive of the Sunjae Group, went down onto the marble in front of the whole assembled establishment of Seoul, clawing at a collar that wasn't the problem, making a sound like a door being forced. The ballroom erupted into exactly the kind of noise that helps no one. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed for water. The press surged. And Dr. Beek, his own physician, reached him first and got it wrong in front of everyone. "He's choking," Beek shouted, hauling at him. "Give him room, he's choking, someone get the food out." He wasn't choking. There was no food in his throat. His throat was closing from the inside, and the seconds Beek spent reaching into his mouth were seconds Tae-jun did not have. Then a voice cut through the whole roaring room, flat and absolute, the voice of someone who has done this while the ground shook. "Move, now. He is not choking." Imani Reeves came through the crowd the way she'd once crossed a lobby, unhurried and unstoppable, dropped to her knees at his side, and put 300 people and their panic behind her like a closed door. She read him in a single second. The flush, the swelling, the whistling fight for air, the fading. Anaphylaxis at the very top of the stairs. Yuri! The injector. Now. Yuri was already there, pressing it into her hand. What Imani did next, she had done 10,000 times in another country. And she did it without a wasted motion and without a word to the crowd. And it is not a thing to be taught in a story. It is a thing to be done by someone who trained for years to do it. She had the injector against him, and empty in less time than it takes to describe, and then her hands were on his jaw, opening his airway, giving it the one thing it wanted, which was room, and she put her face down close to his and spoke to him in the low, steady voice she had used on frightened soldiers. "I've got you, Mr. Kang. Breathe with me. You were right about how strong you are. Now breathe." Dr. Beek lunged back in. "That could kill him. You don't even know what's—" "I know exactly what it is," Imani said, without looking up, and there was something in the calm of it that silenced him more completely than a shout ever could. "You've had 6 years and 4 reactions to figure that out. Call an ambulance and stay out of my way." She held his airway open with her own hands on that marble floor, counting his breaths, watching his color, ready to spend the second injector if the first didn't hold, while a room full of the most powerful people in Korea stood useless around a woman in street clothes who had been escorted out of their building 9 hours earlier. And slowly, terribly slowly, the whistling eased. The blue left his lips. Air, real air, went down into Kang Tae-jun and came back out, and his eyes found her face above him, and held on to it like the last solid thing in the world. The paramedics came through the doors 90 seconds later. She gave them the handoff in crisp clinical shorthand, everything they needed in 15 seconds. And only when a man was safely on their stretcher and breathing did she let go. She had told him it would happen. She had told him where, and how long he'd have. And then, after he fired her for it, she had come anyway, and been the only one in the room who could save his life. Imani followed the stretcher out through a corridor lined with stunned faces and flashing cameras. And she did not stop until she reached the cold concrete of the ambulance bay, where the doors closed and the siren pulled away and there was, at last, nobody left to save. Then her hands began to shake. She sat down on the curb in her coat, in the dark, and the 9 hours and the 3 months and the 9 years all arrived at once. And Imani Reeves put her face in her trembling hands and wept, not from fear. From the enormous, shuddering relief of a body that had held itself perfectly still through a thing that mattered and could finally let go. Her phone buzzed. Grace in Atlanta, who had somehow known. "Talk to me," Grace said. "He lived," Imani got out. "Grace, he lived." "Of course he did," Grace said softly. "You were there." What Imani did not know yet, sitting alone on that curb, was that the door she had just walked out of was about to be torn off its hinges, and that by morning the whole country would know the name of the nurse Kang Tae-jun had fired at noon. They handed him the note in the hospital, near dawn, when he was stable and awake and quiet. Yuri had kept it. She set it on the blanket by his hand without a word, and Kang Tae-jun unfolded the paper he had ordered thrown in the trash 9 hours before, and read it. "I could be wrong. I hope, more than you know, that I am." He read to the end. "Just don't be dead." He read it again. And this man who never looked weak in front of anyone turned his face to the hospital window so that even his assistant would not see what a piece of paper had done to him. She had known. She had known exactly. She had put it in writing, dated and signed, 4 times, and he had called it alarmist. She had told him the room, the meal, the 10 minutes. And then he had humiliated her and dismissed her and thrown her gift in the garbage. And she had come to his party anyway, uninvited, with a second one in her pocket, and knelt on the floor and breathed for him. "Who is she?" he said finally to Yuri. "Really, who did I fire?" Because the rest of the world was already finding out. The emergency physician who received him at the hospital had taken one look at the flawless field handoff and asked who had run the scene. When she heard the name, she stopped. "Imani Reeves? Combat Support Hospital, Kandahar? I trained with people who trained under her. She's a legend in military trauma. What in God's name was she doing as a company flu nurse?" By morning it was a news story, and then it was the news story. The chilled noodle collapse of one of the country's most powerful young chief executives at his own gala. Saved on the ballroom floor in front of the entire press corps by a woman his company had fired that same day. The footage was everywhere. A guest had filmed all of it. The celebrity doctor shouting the wrong word, and then the quiet woman in the coat parting the crowd and going to her knees. The contrast wrote itself. And when the reporters dug, they found the rest. Decorated United States Army flight nurse. 2 deployments. A trauma reputation that made the doctors interviewed about her go quiet with respect. The Sunjae Group had employed one of the finest emergency clinicians alive, buried her under flu shots, ignored 4 written warnings, and fired her hours before she saved the chief executive's life with the exact intervention she had begged them to prepare. She was the only person in that room, the emergency physician told a reporter. On camera, who could have saved him? Everyone else, including his own doctor, was going to watch him die and call it a tragedy. She called it a Tuesday and fixed it. The title of the story ran, in the end, almost word for word what he had done and what she had done. Side by side, for the whole country to weigh. And Dr. Baek Seung-ho, celebrity physician to the 20 richest families in Korea, woke up to find the footage of himself shouting, "He's choking," over a man who was not choking playing on every screen in the nation. What none of them knew yet was that the reckoning would not stop at the newspapers because a woman had 4 dated, signed memos in a company file, and every single one of them was about to be read out loud. The consequences came one by one, and each one had the right name on it. Dr. Beak fell first and hardest. Imani's memos, 4 of them, dated and signed and formally dismissed, surfaced in the record. A documented, escalating, life-threatening allergy, flagged in writing 4 separate times by a qualified clinician, waved away as reflux and stress by the man paid $10,000 a month to catch exactly that. The medical board opened an inquiry. His elite clients, who paid for the illusion of safety, fled the moment he became the man on television who got it wrong. His license was suspended pending review. The name that had opened every door in Seoul became the name attached to the noodle video, and no amount of money could buy it back. Director Jang fell next, and his fall was quiet and complete. The Daewha chairman, it turned out, had been at the head table. He had watched a company operating officer's instinct, protect the optics, silence the nurse, nearly kill the man he was about to sign a 100 billion won deal with. "You told your own chief executive to eat the noodles rather than look fragile to me," the old chairman said. "I do not do business with people who manage the truth." Jang was gone from the merger, and then from the company by the end of the month. Madame Kang, the chief executive's mother, who had never once acknowledged the American army nurse, came to the hospital, took Imani's hands in both of hers, and could not finish her sentence. She did not need to. And the Sunjae Group offered Imani Reeves a settlement for wrongful termination so large it was clearly an apology written in the only language the company knew. She turned it down. She had a different idea, and she brought it to the one meeting she agreed to attend. In the chairman's own boardroom, where the family that had let her be fired now rose when she entered. "Keep your settlement," she said. "Build me something instead." Kang Tae-jun came to find her himself the day he left the hospital, not with a car and a security detail. He came alone, on foot, to the small clinic that no longer employed her. And he waited by the door until she was free, and then he did the thing men like him almost never learn to do. "I was wrong," he said. "Not a little. Completely. You told me the truth 4 times, and I told you to be quiet because the truth made me look weak in front of people whose opinion I valued more than my own life. You saved that life anyway. After I threw your warning in the garbage." He stopped and pressed 2 fingers to his sternum, over the place where it had happened, and this time he knew he was doing it. "I don't know how to make that right, but I would like to spend a while trying, if you'll let me." Imani looked at him for a long moment. In another life, on another floor, she had reached out and taken this man's pulse with 2 fingers at his wrist. Professionally, because that was her job. Now she reached out and did it again. 2 fingers, the inside of his wrist, his heartbeat steady and alive against her fingertips because she had made it so. "Start by learning to be the quiet one," she said. "The quiet one is still thinking." He almost smiled. "My father used to say the loudest man in the boardroom is the most frightened." "Mine said the same thing about a fire," she said. "Turns out it's true everywhere." They did not fall into anything quickly, because she was not a woman who moved quickly and he was, at last, learning not to, but he showed up. He listened. He carried from that day to the last day of his life an auto-injector in his inside coat pocket, and once when she teased him about it, he said, without any pride at all, "The strongest thing I own is the thing that admits I can be killed by a bowl of noodles." A nurse taught me that. The thing she asked them to build, they built. The Sunjae Group founded a corporate emergency response and occupational health program. Real one. Trained responders on every floor. Defibrillators in every corridor. A clinic staffed by people empowered to overrule a chief executive when a chief executive was wrong. They named it after no one, at her insistence, because she did not do this for a plaque. She built it and she ran it, and within a year 3 more lives had been saved on those 40 floors by people she had trained. To be calm and certain in the worst 10 minutes of a stranger's day, she kept her field notebook. She started a second one, for the nurses she now taught. And on the first page of each she wrote the same line she had learned at a kitchen counter in Detroit. "Be the quiet one." The quiet one is still thinking. People sometimes ask Imani now, the young nurses she trains, The women who stand against the wall in rooms full of louder and richer people who are certain they know better. What she would tell them. She always says the same thing. Being underestimated is not the insult they think it is. It is a room full of people who have decided not to watch you. And there is nothing more powerful in an emergency than the one person no one is watching, who has spent her whole life getting ready. Competence does not need to raise its voice. It just refuses quietly to be wrong when the wrong answer costs a life. If Imani's story reminded you of your own quiet strength, or of a time you knew something a whole room refused to hear, then this is where that story gets to matter. Subscribe if this channel has earned a place in your feed, and stay close, because there are more women like Imani whose stories deserve to be told. And tell me this honestly. If you were Imani, fired and humiliated at noon by the man who wouldn't listen, would you have left that injector and that note on his desk on your way out for the man who had just thrown you away? Or would you have walked out empty-handed and let his pride finish what it started? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you land and why. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next story.